In 1947, hidden beneath the burning desert cliffs of the Judean wilderness, a discovery was made that would challenge everything historians thought they knew about the ancient world. Inside the dark, forgotten caves of Qumran, shepherds uncovered a collection of ancient scrolls buried for nearly 2,000 years. These manuscripts would become known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. But among the fragments of biblical writings, prayers, and ancient teachings, there was something different, something that carried a darker message, a collection of broken Aramaic fragments that spoke of a forgotten age before the Great Flood, a time when beings described as giants walked upon the earth. A time when the boundaries between heaven and humanity were shattered. The text became known as the Book of Giants. Unlike the familiar stories preserved in the Bible, this ancient manuscript told a much deeper and more disturbing version of the events before the flood. It did not simply describe creatures of enormous size. It revealed beings who possessed names, emotions, fears, and a terrifying awareness that their existence was coming to an end. For thousands of years, this story survived only through scattered references and fragments. Then, buried beneath the stones of Qumran, the lost voice of that ancient world was heard again. But why was this text never included in the traditional biblical canon? Why did generations of readers know about Noah, the flood, and the corruption of humanity, yet never hear the full story of the giants who existed before the waters covered the earth? The Book of Giants was not a simple tale of monsters. It was a warning about a world where beings of incredible power crossed a boundary that was never meant to be crossed. A world where knowledge, strength, and ambition combined into something dangerous. The fragments found in the Qumran caves reveal the final days of these beings. They describe their terrifying dreams, their realization that judgment was approaching, and their desperate search for a way to escape a fate they could not understand. Because the greatest mystery is not that the giants existed. The greatest mystery is that, according to these ancient writings, the giants themselves knew they were doomed. They saw signs that even their enormous strength could not overcome. They witnessed visions that shook their confidence and forced them to confront a terrifying possibility: that there was a power greater than them. And as their world slowly moved toward destruction, the giants would discover a truth that every empire, every kingdom, and every civilization eventually learns. No creation can escape the judgment of its creator. Before the floodwaters covered the earth, before the memory of the old world was buried beneath layers of time, there was a generation unlike any other. They were known as the Nephilim. For centuries, these mysterious beings have existed at the edge of ancient memory. Mentioned briefly in the Book of Genesis as figures from a forgotten age, they appear almost like a shadow passing through history. A single reference describing giants who lived upon the earth before the flood. But the Book of Giants reveals something far more unsettling. It presents the Nephilim not as simple creatures of legend, but as intelligent beings with names, families, and a terrifying connection to the corruption that spread across the ancient world. According to this tradition, the giants were born from a forbidden union between the Watchers, heavenly beings who descended to Earth, and human women. Their arrival represented a violation of the natural order. They were beings caught between two worlds, neither fully belonging to heaven nor truly belonging to humanity. The fragments discovered at Qumran preserve the names of several giants who lived during this era. Among them were Ohia, Hahia, and Mahwe. These were not anonymous monsters, they were individuals who spoke, questioned, feared and searched for answers when they realized their world was beginning to collapse. Ohia and Hahia are described as powerful descendants of the giant lineage, figures who carried the immense strength associated with the Nephilim. Their existence represented the consequences of an ancient rebellion, a moment when the boundaries separating the divine and the human were broken. But the most fascinating figure among them was Mahwe. Unlike a creature driven only by destruction, Mahwe would later become the messenger of the giants, the one chosen to seek answers when fear finally overtook their pride. And that detail reveals something extraordinary. The giants were not unaware of their fate, they understood that something was wrong. The same beings who possessed unimaginable power began to recognize that their existence was unnatural. Their size, their strength, and their connection to forbidden knowledge could not protect them from the consequences of their creation. The Book of Giants presents their world as one consumed by violence and disorder. The corruption was not limited to their physical appearance. It affected the very foundation of creation itself. The laws of nature had been disturbed. The balance between heaven and earth had been broken. And the giants, born from that broken balance, would eventually discover that their greatest enemy was not another army, another kingdom, or another creature. Their greatest enemy was the judgment that was already moving toward them. But before that judgment arrived, the giants would receive a warning that would come not through armies or weapons, but through dreams. Dreams so terrifying that even the strongest beings on Earth would awaken in fear. For beings who had never known fear, the first signs of their destruction did not arrive with fire from the heavens or armies marching against them. They arrived in silence. They came through dreams. The Book of Giants describes a moment when the Nephilim, the powerful descendants of the Watchers, began experiencing visions unlike anything they had ever known. These dreams were not ordinary nightmares. They were messages filled with symbols, warnings, and images of a future that could not be avoided. And for the first time, the giants began to understand that their strength had limits. The fragments found among the Dead Sea Scrolls describe a terrifying vision experienced by the giants. In this dream, they saw a garden unlike any place on Earth, a place filled with life, beauty, and abundance. But something was wrong. The garden was destroyed. The image represented a world that had been corrupted beyond repair. A creation that was once flourishing was now being prepared for destruction. Then came another vision. A single enormous tree stood in the middle of the dream. It rose above everything around it, reaching toward the heavens. It appeared powerful, ancient, and impossible to destroy. But then the tree was cut down. Its branches were removed. Its roots were exposed. And what remained was only a lifeless stump. To the giants, this vision carried a message they could not ignore. The tree was a symbol of their own existence, a powerful lineage that had grown beyond its proper place, a generation that had reached toward heaven itself only to discover that no height could place them beyond judgment. The dreams disturbed them because they revealed something terrifying. The end was already decided. The giants had conquered the physical world. They possessed unimaginable size and strength. They existed as beings who seemed unstoppable, but the visions showed them an enemy they could not fight, a force that did not need weapons, a judgment that did not require an army. The dreams became a turning point. The confidence that once defined the giants began to disappear. They no longer saw themselves as eternal beings. They began to see themselves as temporary creations facing an unavoidable conclusion. The most powerful beings on Earth were now searching for answers. Why were they being shown these visions? Who had sent them? And was there any way to escape what was coming? The giants understood that the dreams were not meant to frighten them without purpose. They were warnings, a final message before the collapse of their world. But the more they searched for meaning, the more terrifying the truth became. The visions were not predicting a possible future. They were revealing a judgment that had already been written. And when the giants finally understood what the dreams meant, they would do something completely unexpected. They would stop fighting, and they would begin begging for mercy. The dreams had revealed the truth. The giants were not facing an enemy they could defeat. They were not facing another kingdom, another race, or another creature that could be overcome through strength. They were facing a judgment that came from beyond the physical world. And for the first time in their existence, the Nephilim felt something they had never truly known before. Desperation. The same beings who once walked across the earth with unmatched power now found themselves searching for a way to survive. Their size could not protect them. Their influence could not save them. The knowledge passed down from their corrupted lineage could not change what had already been decided. The Book of Giants presents a haunting image. The mighty beings of the ancient world, those who seemed almost impossible to challenge, were now afraid of the future. They began searching for answers. They needed someone who could reach beyond their world, someone who could stand between them and the coming destruction. And that is when Mahweh entered the story. Among the giants, Mahweh was chosen as a messenger. His mission was unlike anything the Nephilim had attempted before. He was not sent to conquer. He was not sent to threaten. He was sent to ask for mercy. According to the ancient fragments, Mahweh traveled beyond the familiar boundaries of the earth in search of Enoch, the righteous figure known for walking with God. Enoch was believed to be someone who existed between two realms, a human who had access to heavenly knowledge, a figure capable of carrying messages between the Creator and creation. For the giants, he represented their final hope, their last chance. Imagine the scene described through the fragments. Beings of enormous power, born from forbidden origins, realizing that all their strength was meaningless. They had built a world through domination, but now they were forced to seek help from the very authority they had defied. The irony was unavoidable. The giants had once stood above humanity. Now they were begging for humanity's greatest messenger to speak on their behalf. Mahweh carried their fear, their questions, and their desperate request. He traveled with the weight of an entire doomed generation upon him. They wanted Enoch to intercede. They wanted him to approach heaven and ask if judgment could be delayed, if forgiveness was still possible, if the coming destruction could somehow be stopped. But the Book of Giants reveals a terrifying possibility. The answer may have already been decided before Mahweh ever began his journey. Because some warnings are not invitations to escape, some warnings are the final announcement before the end. And when Mahweh finally reached Enoch, he would discover whether even the most powerful beings on earth could receive mercy after crossing a line that was never meant to be crossed. Mahweh's journey led him to Enoch. The messenger of the giants had crossed the distance between two worlds, carrying the final hope of a doomed generation. Behind him stood the Nephilim, beings who had once believed their power placed them above all others. But now they waited in fear. They waited for an answer. They waited for the possibility that the coming judgment could be stopped. Yet when Enoch received their message, the response was not what the giants wanted to hear. The ancient traditions surrounding Enoch describe him as a man who walked closely with the Creator, a figure who was shown mysteries hidden from ordinary humanity. He was not simply a messenger of comfort, he was a messenger of truth. And the truth he carried was devastating. The judgment against the giants had already been established. There would be no battle, no final challenge, no moment where their strength could change the outcome. The Book of Giants presents a world where even the most powerful beings must eventually answer for their actions. The giants had inherited immense power, but they had also inherited the consequences of a rebellion that had damaged the order of creation. Their request for mercy reached heaven, but heaven did not change its decision. The destruction was coming. The earth would be cleansed. The age of the giants would come to an end. For the Nephilim, this was the moment when fear became complete. They had finally understood the meaning of their dreams. The fallen tree, the ruined garden, and the visions of destruction were not symbols of a possible disaster. They were warnings of a fixed reality. The giants could not escape the consequences of their existence. Their strength, their knowledge, and their enormous bodies were powerless against a judgment that came from beyond the physical world. And there was a deeper tragedy hidden within their story. The giants were not destroyed because they lacked power. They were destroyed because power itself could not save them. The same beings who once represented the height of earthly greatness discovered that nothing created can rise above the authority of its creator. The flood would come. The ancient world would disappear beneath the waters. And the memory of the giants would become a fragment buried beneath history, surviving only through scattered writings and forgotten traditions. But even after their physical destruction, one mystery remained. If the bodies of the giants were gone, what happened to their spirits? What remained after the last giant fell? Because according to later traditions connected to this ancient story, the end of the giants was not the end of their influence. It was only the beginning of another mystery. The flood erased an entire world. Cities, kingdoms, and generations disappeared beneath the waters. The age of the giants came to an end, and the beings who once walked the earth as symbols of unimaginable power were reduced to fragments of forgotten history. But according to ancient traditions connected to the Book of Giants, the destruction of their bodies was not the final chapter. A question remained. What happens to beings created through a corruption of heaven and earth? What happens when something unnatural is removed from the physical world, but its existence has already left a mark upon creation? Later interpretations of these traditions suggested that while the bodies of the giants were destroyed, their spirits continued to wander. They became associated with restless forces, invisible influences, and beings separated from the world they once controlled. Whether understood as literal history, spiritual symbolism, or ancient mythology, the story of the giants has survived for thousands of years because it carries a powerful warning. It is not only a story about enormous beings, it is a story about limits, about what happens when creation attempts to cross boundaries that were never meant to be crossed. The Book of Giants, preserved through the fragments found in the Qumran caves, offers a glimpse into a world that exists between history and legend, a world filled with forgotten names, mysterious dreams, and warnings about pride, corruption, and judgment. The giants believed their strength made them untouchable, but in the end, they discovered something far more terrifying than any enemy. They discovered that power without wisdom leads to destruction. That knowledge without responsibility becomes dangerous, and that even the greatest beings can fall when they challenge the order of creation itself. Thousands of years later, the fragments of this ancient story still raise unanswered questions. Why were these writings preserved? Why did communities continue copying traditions about the giants long after their world had vanished? And why does humanity remain fascinated by stories of forgotten civilizations, hidden knowledge, and beings that existed before recorded history? Perhaps the reason is simple. The story of the giants is not only about the past, it is about humanity's endless search for answers. It reminds us that every civilization, no matter how powerful, eventually faces the consequences of its choices. Beneath the desert sands of Qumran, an ancient voice survived, a voice telling the story of a lost world, a world of giants, a world of rebellion, a world that vanished beneath the flood, but whose shadow continues to echo through history.